I will surrender my position as empress. Chapter 4. The Emperor Who Doesn't Appear. It was quite impolite, but Adele did not care. She was the first to insult her, and she was the one who would become empress, after all. A smirk played on her lips as she surveyed Diane with a cool, calculating gaze. The other woman shifted uneasily under her scrutiny, but Adele paid her no mind. Taste. Adele grinned before releasing Diane's hair. She then turned and walked towards her armchair, where she sat down. She closed and reopened her eyes with a drowsy expression, but she did not offer Diane her seat. Adele cocked her head to one side and crossed her legs. Why are you giving me this recommendation? Not even reluctant to offer unsolicited advice. Her tone was dry, but the implied meaning was thorny. Diane raised her crimson lips and rolled her eyes in response to her question. You do not know His Majesty's preferences, therefore I will inform you. I'm asking you why. Are you the type of person who tells everyone about their preferences? Adele chuckled after stating this. The eerie sound of laughter resonated throughout the dim bedroom, creating a disturbing atmosphere. Adele whispered to her maid, who was observing her. From what I've heard, Echmont's milkshake is extremely popular. I'm curious. Deliver me a glass of moonshine. Yes. Bring a drink, I mean. I believe I'll feel invigorated after I drink a cup and get a good night's sleep. Ah, absolutely. Adele closed her eyes and buried herself in the sofa as the maid abruptly turned around and departed. Didn't you say you would dry my hair? Quick, dry it. Diane held her breath and exhaled as she picked up the towel in Adele's direction. Adele's hair was difficult to dry because she was entirely reclined on the couch. Adele, who had her eyes closed and was vigorously wiping the moisture from the ends of her hair, suddenly said, Would you like to inform His Majesty the Emperor of my preferences? Diane's hands stilled in her hair. Pardon. I appreciate a man who can speak candidly about private matters, she murmured. Diane remained silent for a moment, her expression stony. Yes, I understand, she said at last. Adele's golden eyes slowly opened, her long lashes fluttering as she fixed her gaze on Diane. She whispered, and one final point. Diane tensed, her gentle smile faltering as Adele continued. When I was born, I never considered conforming to someone else's preferences. So, you are not required to share your Majesty's preferences with me. It's difficult for me to understand my own taste, but I have little interest in other people's. Diane's expression crumbled, but Adele only grinned and tilted her head, saying, You can go. Diane took a step back, her mind racing as she struggled to regain her composure. She took a deep breath and forced a friendly smile. Sorry for being disrespectful. I just wanted to see the princess. Forgive me. Forgive me as well, Adele replied coolly. Diane's smile faltered, but she quickly regained it and said, Then I hope you have a restful night's sleep. Please contact me at any moment if you have a problem. I warned them against shirking their responsibilities to you. With a courteous bow, Diane left the room, but Adele's gaze remained fierce as she watched her go. She mumbled to herself, The Emperor's mistress greets you as soon as you arrive. Wonderful. Adele began to be concerned about her future husband, the Emperor she had never seen before. She mumbled in a bitter voice, Karl Ulrich Echmont. As soon as Adele, the future empress, arrived in the capital of Echmont, the preparations for her wedding ceremony began in earnest. Adele spent the entire day being attended to by her lady-in-waiting, undergoing an exhaustive range of treatments, from massages to relax her muscles, to skincare and hair care. It felt so indulgent that Adele couldn't help but luxuriate in the pampering, giving herself over to the ministrations of her attendants. Next on the agenda was nail care. "Do whatever pleases you," Adele said, as her ladies set to work on her hands and feet. The pedicure was especially relaxing, and Adele closed her eyes and let out a contented sigh. "How long did you say the wedding would be?" Adele asked, as she lay back in her chair. "1 week," came the reply. A week is enough," Adele murmured, her mind already turning to the next task at hand. "What type of cuisine is served during lunch?" "We are making a well-cooked pork meal per your request," her lady-in-waiting informed her. "Good," Adele said, her stomach rumbling. "Finish it a little quicker. I must consume something." The week flew by in a whirlwind of preparations and celebrations. A week had passed since the last time the emperor had seen the future empress, and whispers of her beauty and elegance had already begun to circulate throughout the imperial court. Adele had also become aware of the extent of Diane Poitier's influence and power within the palace. Before earning the title of empress, Adele had only had a cursory knowledge of the inner workings of the court. As she examined the exquisite sleeves of her bridal gown, a pristine white creation intricately embroidered with gold thread, Adele murmured to herself, "This is the stone I rolled." Just then, her maid entered, bearing a crown for Adele to wear on her wedding day. "You will enter while wearing this," the maid said as she opened the box to reveal a crown made of silvery white gold. Adele examined herself disinterestedly in the mirror as the maid placed the crown on her head with care. But as she looked at herself, a faint frown creased her forehead. "Don't you like it?" the maid asked tentatively. "Do you have any crowns of gold?" "I prefer gold over silver," Adele said without hesitation. "As there is still time until the wedding, I would like to replace the crown." "Go obtain a golden crown." The maid hesitated for a moment, but ultimately returned the crown chosen by Diane and hurried to the imperial treasury to retrieve a golden crown for Adele. At the same time, Karl was also dressed formally, with Diane at his side, carefully selecting every aspect of his clothing, from the cloth to the pattern. As she buttoned his robe, her slender hand trembled uncontrollably. Karl reached out and took her hand in his own. "Diane," he called her with an uncommonly warm tone. Diane's light blue eyes filled with tears, and she softly put her forehead on the emperor's chest. She wondered if she should push him away, but ultimately, she remained still in his embrace. Karl looked down at her golden, curly hair, hugging her lightly, as if she were fragile and could break if handled too roughly. He was reminded of her petite and vulnerable nature, and the guilt washed over him. He wanted to shield her from the title of empress, but also knew he couldn't avoid it. When Diane learned that the Empress Palace had been vacant for some time and a new owner had moved in, she became so sensitive that she couldn't sleep. The thought of the word, Empress, caused her stomach to ache. Her attendants had asked if they could meet the future Empress at least once, but she had denied their request. With her forehead still resting on Karl's chest, Diane slowly raised her head and looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Do not cry," Karl said in a deep voice. Diane's body shook with sobs as she whispered, "My apologies, Your Majesty. I vowed not to cry, yet my eyes are full of tears." Diane kissed the emperor's lips, who was dressed in a robe. As usual, the emperor maintained his silence. Her lips carried the flavor of salty tears. "The empress is lovely," Diane said, trying to provoke a response from him. "She asked whether I was a maid," she added. In response to these comments, Karl's body tensed. Diane, whose body was pressed against his, detected the change immediately. She rested her forehead on Karl's chest and inhaled deeply. Karl grabbed Diane's shoulders and drew her away from him. He looked at her with a harsh, icy gaze. Didn't you mention that day, the day you went to say hello, that nothing happened? Karl asked, his tone accusatory. Nothing occurred. It was only logical for her to inquire as to whether I was a lady in waiting, Diane replied, trying to defend herself. He had heard something similar. I was unable to respond to that question. I dare not reply to her. Diane raised her hand and caressed Karl's face gently. I just need your majesty, is it possible? All I need is your majesty. I guess my greed is too much. Karl's heart raced as he watched Diane's breathing become more labored. He had never seen her like this before and it scared him. He knew she had a frail body, but he didn't expect her to collapse like this. He could see the resemblance to his mother, who had also been weak and easily succumbed to illness. Diane, take slow breaths, Karl urged her, trying to calm her down. Diane was still breathing heavily as she clutched onto Karl's arm, but soon she sat down as if she were dizzy. Karl panicked and called out, "Is there anybody out there? Hurry! Call the doctor, hurry!" Upon hearing the Emperor's urgent plea, the exterior of the door became abruptly noisy as servants and attendants rushed to the scene. Diane's weak voice captured Karl's attention as she spoke. "You cannot leave me. Please do not abandon me, Your Majesty." Following her statement, Diane eventually passed out. Did he mean to mock me? Adele stood alone, her wedding gown billowing in the wind as she gazed out at the horizon with a cold, hard stare. Her thoughts were a jumbled mess as the minutes ticked by, and her heart ached for the friends and family she had left behind in Kotrov. The nobles surrounding her whispered and sneered, and she couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water in this foreign land. As the laughter of the aristocrats reached her ears, Adele felt a bitter smile twist her lips. The emperor, her betrothed, was late to their own wedding, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been dropped into the middle of enemy territory, defenseless and alone. But as she thought back to the words of her nanny, who had held her tightly and whispered in her ear as she left Kotrov, Adele's resolve hardened. "Remember, Adelheid, you are the only person you can trust here. Your honor and dignity are yours to safeguard." With a deep breath, Adele straightened her spine and turned to her attendant, her golden eyes commanding and her voice clear. "Bring me a comfortable chair until the emperor arrives. I will need to sit for a while." The nobility around her fell silent, stunned by the unexpected display of strength from the foreign princess. As the maids scurried to bring her a chair, Adele sat down with a regal smile on her face, showing no sign of frustration or disappointment at the emperor's tardiness. Instead, she commanded a chair be placed in front of the high priest, not at the entrance of the great temple. As soon as she sat down, facing the palace entrance, the dynamics between her and the nobility shifted. Her piercing golden gaze swept across the crowd, and a heavy silence descended upon the chaotic palace. For a moment, Adele's gaze lingered on a single figure, Lionel, whose midnight blue eyes stood out among the crowd. When their eyes met, Lionel bowed in silent respect, and Adele gave a small nod before turning her gaze away. His brother, Theseus, seated next to him, muttered softly, "You invert the situation as if you were flipping your palm." Whispers could be heard among the nobles seated behind Lionel. "Oh, princess, you are the type of person I cannot tear my eyes away from, you have excellent demeanor." Adele smiled. The aristocrats who had been snickering at her casual demeanor, now snuck glances and cleared their throats.